America is hurtling toward a demographic disaster, warns Emma Waters of the Heritage Foundation. She was recently profiled by the New York Times about ways in which President Trump can make good on his promise of delivering a new baby boom. So Emma joins us now. Emma, thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. So it's no secret that the Heritage Foundation is a key policy player in Washington, D.C., especially for the Trump administration. So what are some of the ideas that are currently under consideration about improving the birth rate?
So, when it comes to our policy efforts, I can, of course, only speak to the work that I and the Heritage Foundation are doing on this matter. But particularly when it comes to declining birth rates, there are two things that I and others at Heritage have really identified as drivers in declining birth rates. So, the first is the decline in marriage. What's so interesting to me is that when you look at the history of birth rates, before birth rates started declining in the United States, we actually saw a massive reduction in the number of marriages that were happening. So from the 1970s onwards, with hookup culture, no-fault divorce, and general cultural changes around people's interest in both getting married and staying married, we've actually seen marriages decrease long before we see births decrease. And notably, when you look inside married families in America today, most families are having 2 to 3 children on average, which is at replacement rate. It's that we have so many men and women who are just not getting married today that we're seeing increasing rates of childlessness among those couples. And the second thing that I have really focused on is the increasing rates of infertility, or people who are quite literally not able to have children or really struggling to have the children they desire. And so this corresponds with rising reproductive health conditions like endometriosis and PCOS. And it's one of those areas that has really just not received the attention, the research, and funding that it needs. So one of the main things that we focused on is promoting research and funding into reproductive health conditions, fertility treatment, looking at like root cause fertility treatments, as well as things that help women and couples understand their natural fertility and charting.
Now, that's definitely sounds all great to me, right? I remember last week I was doing a podcast with my now colleague, Matt Gaetz, and we're talking about President Trump saying that he'd be open to a $5,000 baby bonus, right, per baby. And we're talking about the pros and the cons of such a move. And I know that after that podcast aired, a lot of viewers, a lot of obviously conservative viewers, were wondering why the government should even get involved with something like the birth rate crisis. So I would like to pose that question then to you. Is this, because some would say, is this the government trying to socially engineer, right? We saw how that worked in China, not so great. Or would you perhaps say that this is more about the government almost getting out of the way and allowing culture to flourish and do the job instead? So how would you perhaps handle that? Because I know that's something that will come up.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think you are spot on in the direction you're pointing here. So, when it comes to declining birth rates, the reason this matters so much is that without children, you simply don't have a future for your nation. So, the number of children born affects everything from our military readiness. Do we have men who are ready and able to serve in combat as soldiers? It affects our overall GDP and our workforce strength. It affects things like our education and our research outcomes. Notably, many K-12 institutions and higher ed institutions are already preparing to downsize in coming years because there's simply not as many children being born. And so they're starting to prepare for what it looks like when you just have emptier classrooms than what we normally have. And then, of course, this also poses problems when it comes to elder care and just the overall vitality of a nation. Ultimately, happy people have children. And so if you have more and more people who are disinterested or unable to have children, what does that really say about the health of our nation overall? And so when it comes to the response of the government, I think there's two things here. First, we recognize that because of cultural forces, financial and economic forces, as well as physical health reasons, many people are either unable or really struggling to have the children they desire. So this is not about forcing anyone to have children, but it's about providing support and really supplementing the income and means of people who are interested in having more children than they feel like they can currently afford. And so with something like a baby bonus or a family bonus, what we're trying to do is not force people to have children, right? And we're not trying to take away the financial strain or pay for everything, right? But the point is really just to help provide some assistance and encouragement to those who have children, showing that this is something we value and this is something we're really willing to invest our resources into.
Yeah, I believe that the government and laws and policy should encourage that which is good and to discourage that which is bad. And happy family formation under God. I think that's a good thing, right? That's something we should be encouraging. And this birth dearth is something that's affecting all nations. I think only a few nations in sub-Saharan Africa are some of the only that have, or the only countries so far that have escaped it so far. But the rest of the world, even countries, Malaysia, just countries that you wouldn't maybe necessarily think of, they're also finding the same issue. It's interesting. India, for the first time, its population surpassed that of China. They share a border. They've kind of had some back and forth, right? And so China, with their one-child policy that unfortunately hit female babies the worst, a lot of forced sterilizations, a lot of forced abortions, a lot of evil, a lot of babies that were born in infanticide then were later killed by their own government. It's interesting, though, that now their population is decreasing, at least relative to India. That's scaring their government. So now they're trying to say, well, forget about the one-child policy. We need 2 children now. And it's interesting to me because we always talk about this geopolitical race that the U.S. is in against China, and China isn't trying to replace its population with immigration. That's what the West is trying to do, and that's caused a whole myriad of issues. China instead is trying to increase the birth rate. Of course, because of their communist roots, not a lot of great policies going on over there, but at least that's the mindset, right? So it's interesting to see that it's playing out. It's a conversation that's happening everywhere. And I would like to ask you, because the New York Times, of course, profiled you. We saw baby 1 and baby 2 and your husband, of course, in that big picture. So I was wondering, do you believe that the New York Times, were they fair to you in this article? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So when it came to the logistics, we had the best experience working with them. The photographer, the team, they were incredibly respectful, and we actually had a really great conversation leading up to it. For the piece itself, I think overall it was a really good framing of our issue. The only thing I would say is the article focused pretty heavily on charting courses for women to understand their fertility, and that's of course part of the larger policy project that we're interested in. But it's really only one small part of it. Ultimately, what we're hoping to do is promote root cause treatments for infertility, or something called restorative reproductive medicine, which isn't just looking at charting of cycles, but it's looking at the man and woman's overall reproductive health, and really asking how can we address those underlying conditions that I mentioned earlier to provide people not only with options to have children, but just with a better lifestyle overall, so that they're not experiencing pain or other limitations that really do downplay your overall satisfaction in life. But I think by and large, they represented the issue well. And it was exciting to see such a large newspaper really start to consider these various approaches to treating infertility and encouraging family formation. And that was one of the main things they highlighted, was not only the NIH's role in research and funding for these conditions, but the fact that we don't simply want to see more babies born, but we want to see more families formed, because we know that it's within families that children are most likely to flourish and do the best.
I love that. I love the holistic way in which you are approaching this issue. Emma, always a pleasure. Thanks for making time for us.
Of course. Thanks so much.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.